Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon, and welcome to the post 127, Seeing Beyond the Present. This post is our New Year's post. Every year we try to enable positivity and hope and presence and momentum to the future. That's the goal of the New Year post. But of course, this last 12 months has been difficult. So many of our colleagues have lost their jobs. So many of our colleagues, so many of our friends are trapped in precariat, part-time and contract posts. So what do we do next? Well, the point of the post this year, the New Year's post this year, is to activate momentum, to find strategies to see beyond our present. And it's my great pleasure to introduce a rather remarkable scholar to help us with that project. Dr. Damien O'Meara is a lecturer in public relations at RMIT. He has enormous interests in how we build effective and inclusive media and communication systems. He also has profound expertise in understanding the workforce in the creative industries. So his expertise is profound. He is a remarkable human being. So let's share this time. Let's share this space with Damien, and let's find a way to see a different future and to set a different future. Oh, look, Damien, I am so happy to see you. Happy even doesn't really capture it, but Happy New Year, and thank you for joining us and the Happy New Year
Thank
vlog.
you. Happy New Year to you too.
And everybody out there, you are legendary. And of course, Damien is legendary. And look, Damien, I was thinking while I was preparing for this particular New Year post and seeing you again, and it just gets me quite emotional, but seeing you again. And I remember where you were almost a year ago to the day. And I'll just sort of overshare that with colleagues. Your PhD was being examined. You'd done a fantastic, incredible job on this thesis that we'll talk about in a second. But this time last year, you were being examined. And the days and the weeks dripped, drip on, and we were wondering what was going to happen. But could you tell us something about that challenging 6 months to a year around the submission of a PhD and the 6 months to a year after you've got the results? That people rarely speak the words about that liminal period. Could you tell us about it?
Yeah, it's an interesting period. I particularly that lead up to submission. I think like I assume from my one person perspective, I felt very progressed at that final candidate to milestone. I had a complete draft. It needed work. There were a few holes, but I had a complete draft and I felt pretty confident about the next 6 months and I had a plan to sort of to get submitted. And I think what I've learned is it doesn't matter how prepared you are, that last 6 months is incredibly intense, requires a huge amount of work. And in particular, I imagine it's different for different students, but the
Mm.
kind of stress of the financial burden it really starts to kind of rise. Submitted about a month and a half after my scholarship ended. I was really lucky to have a scholarship for my final 18 months.
Well,
And just that last sort of 6 weeks, just compounding stresses as you're trying to focus on this thing that needs all of your attention and you're kind of watching your savings go down and you're thinking about, oh, I need to like make a call about do I have to step back a bit to go and earn some money so I can keep going. And I think it kind
mm.
of highlighted for me the importance of you have to finish quickly. And I think it's that thing if you get advice from lots of people going, oh, take your time, you only get to do this once. And I've learnt to sort of recognize that every piece of advice comes from someone who did a PhD in a very different environment to you. And my advice is going to be completely, it will have some relevance, but will be a different environment to the people who are following. And yeah, there has to be a level of recognition of what happened to me and my experience and the time I was doing this will never be the same again. It's always going to be getting a bit harder. And I've sort of probably the key thing I've taken out of that lead up to submission is to recognize that speed is important, but also recognizing, and as I sort of look at supervising in the future, that
Mm-mm.
I can't relate to the situation someone's in, and I have to work to a timeline that they think they can deliver. I think that's a really important factor here because it's just going to get harder. And I want to sort of say, be positive. Like the hard work paid off. I was so proud of my thesis. I loved doing it. I know some people, can get really sick of their topic. I'm really still really passionate about my topic and want to still work in it. And so there's a huge amount of positivity, but it was a really tough, particularly the last 6 months was really tough to kind of find your way through and to keep the focus, keep the motivation, and keep your head clear enough to kind of do the work that needs to be done.
Oh,
The
look, Damien,
following 6 months. Oh,
I was going
sorry.
to say, no, mate, you've picked up a lot there. The importance of a communication system, that you've got to have a communication system, but it's got to be student centered, student focused. The supervisor has to listen. And also, you've picked up that crucial thing about you can see, obviously, you held on and you were intellectually robust, but can you see why 6 months after a scholarship finishes and the
Hmm.
thesis is not finished, the mental health concerns go through the roof?
Yeah. Oh, the 6 weeks. Like I got to the end of that, and there's a picture of my dog behind me. She sensed that anxiety. The day I submitted, we joke about it. I've never seen her sleep so deeply because she spent that 6 weeks sitting next to me, just fretting because I was just this ball of nerves. And then it was literally an hour after I submitted, I was looking at my dog. I'm like, you okay? Like she was passed out on the couch, couldn't wake her up. And I feel like, oh, okay, like that's a good sign that I was taking on a lot because even the creatures around me were feeling it.
Oh, that's astonishing. But then, of course, the thesis was submitted and did unbelievably well. Talk us through that very complicated transition. As I said, I've sort of been going back to my data set of one, trying to remember my transitions, and from because I was in full time work on the PhD, and then I moved to another job, and I just remember it as chaotic, and I've almost blocked the emotions. It was just do the work. What happened that 6 months after the thesis was through?
So I had a long examination process. It
You
took
did.
6 months to get examined. And I don't know exactly what happened, but one of the examiners had to sort of couldn't complete it. And I think it's a pretty tough world out there. I imagine their circumstances changed, and so they had to find someone else. And that other person did a great job, and I'm very grateful for them for coming in and doing it. And I think they did a relatively quick job in the circumstances. And so I sort of approached that 6 months to go, well, firstly, like I had submitted, I was doing a bit of work, but I had a bit of time to kind of consolidate what I wanted to do and work out what my next steps were.
Yes.
And I focused on getting a lot of things written up, just to sort of have work in progress and at a point where I could start refining it. And that was really useful, and it meant I had some quick wins early in the next year. But my big focus was finding work.
Yeah.
And I like it's tough in the academy. I think I came from a lucky place in the sense that I came to the PhD a bit later. I was in my mid 30s. I had a career in communication and advertising before that for over 10 years.
Yeah.
And even though my PhD was in television studies, it was also looking a lot at the role and function of publicity. And so I lent into communication as a key focus because I knew I could add a lot of value. I have a lot of industry experience. I started like my pathway into the PhD was through teaching. I was teaching sessionally in communication.
Yes.
Um, and so I had a lot of teaching experience to bring as well. And so I sort of focused on that's actually what I offer. And while I feel like a lot of people might have expected me to go down that kind of media and cultural studies pathway, I made a point of going, well, how do I tie my interests in creative industries into communication? And that's kind of the thing that I think made me stand out is that I was bringing something that maybe wasn't getting hit at different universities, and therefore there was opportunity to kind of make a case why I would be good, even though my PhD was under examination.
Look, I think that's brilliant. And in North America, we call that profcom, professional communication. And in Australia, we don't use that as much. We tend to use communication, and it is in PR departments often, occasionally in business. But that is a huge area of expansion. So for our colleagues that perhaps are in the more sociological disciplines, just being aware of the com interfaces could be useful. So, Damien, I think that's brilliant, and you've captured that period. What I loved from what you've said there, and we've never spoken about this difficult period before, is that you went for the easy wins. You were tired, your dog slept for 3.5 days, and you were focused on, right now, let's clear the decks. I'll use the dreadful cliche. What's the low hanging fruit here? And while I've got a bit of time and getting the full time job in place, let's get the CV moving. Is that accurate?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That was the goal, and certainly moving quickly, I think, was important because I know that there can be, again, that advice you get that's kind of from someone else's perspective from a different time. There was a lot of advice to like take 6 months, take a break, and I get it. And for some people that might be the right advice. I was worried if I stopped, I wouldn't start moving again, and so I was very sort of focused on keeping the momentum going and not losing it. And
Yeah.
I did take some rest. I did kind of work slower than I normally do, and I came from a really fast-paced industry. Like
Yeah.
I worked in major advertising campaigns. So, I'm used to getting up at 4 in the morning to go to a dairy
Yeah.
farm to film something because that's
Yeah.
what the brief requires. Um, got to get the sunrise.
Then you
But so
remember, I'm in Palmerston North, Fonterra. Dairy is the major
oh
industry
yeah,
in Palmerston North.
it is.
Sorry, please
But yeah,
continue.
it was I sort of focused on there are a lot of easy wins. Often you come out of a PhD, you have a lot of ideas that were things that you couldn't see through. And so just leaning in and going, right, well, let me pick those up and see what I can do with them. And so far, like quite a few of them have turned into submissions. Some of them are still sort of in the process, but are being built up. But just having them all started means that it's not hard to jump in and get something moving. And I often find starting's the hardest part. Like if you have a blank piece of paper, it's much harder than having, oh, I've already got 3,000 words on this page. What do I do
Oh,
with that 3,000 words next? I got like lots of options. Blank page, where do I start? So.
oh, exactly right. And I know you walk your dog every morning, and they always say in fitness that the hardest step you'll ever take is putting on your shoes to go
Mm.
for a walk. And so once you've got your shoes on, you're out the front door, things are a lot easier. And I think that's a metaphor for research as well. I'm going to do something horrible to you now. If we can, we're all going forward, and I'm excited, and I'm thinking, what's my low hanging fruit? So you've got me moving. But before we move to that vista, can I just take us back to the thesis, because in some ways the step back to the thesis is also a crucial step forward in your future. And querying Australian screens was your great PhD topic. And I'm interested in how you have used, and I mean overtly, you've been really strategic, use the PhD as the springboard for the next set of iterations of your research career. And look, I've seen this and I've pre-ordered it, just so you know. You've got a book coming out from Routledge
Mm.
next year, there or thereabouts, on the thesis. Queer Stories in Australian TV Drama was the book I pre-ordered. Is that the title that's coming out?
Yes, yes, yeah, that's the title. It's the monograph from the thesis, so I'm in the almost through the process of kind of adapting the thesis into the monograph. Um,
Congratulations, Angel.
okay, so yeah, no, it's sort of again in some ways low-hanging fruit. A book proposal is something that if it's in your head, you can churn out really quickly. So certainly that was probably the first thing I did, even though I was waiting for it to be examined. I got as
Brilliant.
much of the book proposal together as I could and started shopping it around with my colleagues who could give me feedback on it, and refining it and getting it to a good place. And it meant that once it came through, there was really just a few little edits to add in terms of what the examiners had said, to finalize it and get it ready to go out. And so I submitted my book proposal within a week of being conferred because it was all ready and ready to go. And that again kind of helps maintain the momentum. Now I have a deadline. It's something I can work towards. I'm a very deadline driven person. um, but yeah, no, the the research, like this whole research project came out of frustration that every time I saw queer stories in mainstream TV, everyone I knew would tell me everything that was wrong with it. And I would just be sitting there going, no, no, how did it get there? Like that it's there matters. And that's like mainstream television is a bureaucracy and it has will have had to have been a negotiation the entire way up. And I'm very obsessed with that and that kind of something as a product of its time is actually it's a product of its processes. And so I really wanted to understand what those processes were. And yeah, so I think the book is exciting to me because it's going to be hopefully be quite useful to the industry as much as the academy because it's about how did people make those negotiations? How did they kind of put forward their artistic vision, but recognize that in a mainstream format, it has to be a negotiation with other people and their anxieties and their perceptions and their expectations of audiences. And that's not changing. Like we think streaming's completely changing the world, and there's lots of things it is changing, but the negotiation doesn't move on. You still have lots and lots of masters that you have to please. And in fact, because the industry is diversifying in its kind of globalization, we're diversifying funding, and it's no longer two networks that are commissioning you, it's 10. And so you've got to now please 10 different people with 10 different interests who, if you're making queer stories, will have 10 different views on how valuable they are to their audiences. So
Oh, that's interesting to me. So is the green lighting process even more intricate and complex now through streaming and the multi-phasic international funding protocols? Is that the argument?
yeah, yeah, it creates additional
Mm.
layers of approvals. It creates, you do a rough cut, you send it out to notes, you do a script, you send it out to notes, you do a workshop and have networks and commissioners in the room. They all have a say. They don't necessarily agree with each other. And you've got to sort of work out how do you balance all these interests and still achieve the product you want to make. And I that is really interesting to me. I think there's lots of big policy implications for understanding that. And there's lots of people going into this industry. And it's good to go in with a strong artistic vision of what you want to do, but also having a bit of a realistic understanding, to not spit the dummy the second someone pushes back on your idea and to understand ways you can kind of advocate and guarantee the potential success of your idea through these processes is really important.
Oh, this is brilliant. So just to clarify, this book is coming out. So you've had the deadline. It's coming out. It's being published by Routledge. So congratulations, because that's a thing. That is a thing. So amazing. And it's coming out in 2026. Any sense? So second half of the year,
Second
September,
half. So
October.
the manuscript is due at the beginning of February, and I'm pretty confident I'll meet that. So hopefully second half of the year.
Oh, that's tremendous. Well, I certainly recommend it to you. I obviously slightly stalked Damien in a really, really non-threatening way. And I can say he's a truly remarkable writer and researcher. So I'm certainly looking forward to that. But look, can we go to, I suppose, let's now think about the relationship between teaching and research. And obviously you're a fantastic teacher. You teach at RMIT. And this is your first full-time academic position. And that's a whole different, kettle of fish. Now, I think this is a great post for you, and I think it's a fantastic course for you, and I think it's a fantastic university. But since you've gained this stability in an academic post, how has that changed how you think about your research?
It, it's interesting. I always, so the thing that I didn't get to do in my PhD was how are these stories promoted? And I really wanted to explore that, but there's something that just wasn't going to fit in the word count, in the scope, and I had to kill some darlings, and that was one of them. Uh, and so I certainly kind of entered this post knowing that I was really interested in communication practice in these industries, in creative industries broadly. And part of the issue that has arisen in my discussions with people in the industry, but also just in kind of having conversations with new and emerging artists, is there's often money to make something, and then there's no money to tell anyone it exists. And then the response is, oh, it didn't get as much attention as we hoped it did, and we forgot to tell people it existed. and so there's a new and growing role of creative practitioners having to become their own publicists. And it's a very
Yes.
specific set of skills. It's a professionalized industry. It's an accredited industry. I am a member of the CPRA because I've been working in PR for a long time, and I have an accredited degree that allows me to do that. And a lot of these practitioners are kind of having to jump in the deep end and work it out as they go. And the big thing is that it's an industry of relationships. You have to have a relationship with different gatekeepers to understand what they want. You have to be really engaged with what gatekeepers are covering to know how to get into their interests and into their news cycle.
Yeah.
And so I'm really interested to understand and am working to understand how creative practitioners are navigating these industries and where their frustrations exist there. And so it kind of brings together my PhD research area that I want to continue building on and this area that, frankly, I think it's almost required now that if you're going to study creative writing, film and television, if you're going to study media making, you probably need to be doing some level of study into public relations or digital communication or even advertising, if that's kind of where your bent is, to be able to kind of do that job that is becoming more and more the job of the creatives. So this was a really natural shift for me to go into public relations because I'm now looking at, and I'm in the middle of a research project. I've collected some data on Australian book authors and their experiences of publicity practices, and their expectations of publishers when they first published. What did you expect the publisher? And without fail, a little, I guess, preview of the data is they all said they expected more support than they got, and there were in the kind of qualitative data discussions of, oh, I was promised at least three promotional activities, and they were actually three Instagram posts. And I didn't know that. And then by the time I found that out, the kind of excitement around my book launch had died down, and I didn't know how to push it further. And so I want to equip these incredible creatives with more skills to understand how to get into the media, how to get coverage, how to be kind of working in a way that builds your profile in and around, say, a book launch, but also way before and way after. Like you can be in the media every week if you want.
Look, I'm glad you're saying this. You saw my face sort of have a bit of a glisten with happiness because part of what I do is, again, digitally stalk a whole bunch of people on Threads. Threads is a very strange interface and platform, and I'm just gently watching what's going on there at the moment. But the number of indie authors, or indeed, what do they call them? Trad published authors who are sort of just complaining. All they do is just complain, and they say they spend their life selling, and I'm looking at how they're, inverted commas, selling their books, and you wouldn't go to the bathroom at the same time as this person, let alone buy their book, right? So I think what you're saying is crucial here, and thinking through micro credentialing. I don't know if RMIT is thinking of micro credentialing and scaffolding these quals, but that would be a great opportunity, particularly for the burgeoning independent publishing industries, because I would
Mm.
argue traditional publishing has a whole series of challenges, as you and I know. And you've got a traditional publisher, but actually you do 99.99% of the work. But if you don't know what that work is, the book isn't going to sell, let alone as an independent publisher. So what you just said there has changed my life.
No, it's I feel like authors are running like they're swimming upstream. They're being thrown into an industry that's sort of saying, well, when you're successful, we'll invest more into your publicity. But to get there, you
Yeah,
have to just know how the industry works, and you have to be able to build these relationships that they not for through any fault of their own. Like the who would know that, oh, I got published and actually there's a whole bunch of things I need to do to make my book a
yeah,
success. Those opportunities are something I will have to drive. There's something it's an industry I'm gonna have to
yeah.
understand. There are relationships and approaches to publicity that I haven't thought of and maybe don't know about because, you've got to really look at where the industry sort of works and how they are deciding to feature authors. I speak to friends who have published and I say, oh, yeah, have you like this is an interesting story. Why don't you do a edited excerpt and submit it to say The Guardian or even to like an independent press of some kind? And they go, oh, I can do that. I'm like, yeah, you can do whatever you want. Like
And
that.
also, as you've said too brilliantly there, it's about relationships. And most importantly, it's about relationships and loyalty and care for an audience
Mm.
in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. They've got to. it's all about building and engaging your readership. I think social media is given a lot of credit, and it's important. It's part of this matrix, but I am pushing for more understanding of the more kind of traditional media, but or any kind of gatekeeper media where someone has assembled an audience and that audience trusts them as a source in some way. And so it can be independent influencers and, Book Talk is a growing space at the moment. Engaging those people as gatekeepers and saying, well, I want you to look at my book and to read it and to review it or to interview me about it is a way to kind of go into trusted spaces and have that trust associated with your work. And I think people underestimate the value of that.
People are going to lose their mind. That is absolutely phenomenal, Damien. That's changed my mind. I'm going to think about that a lot. You might be careful. I might come a calling with a co-authorship
Uh,
conversation for you in the coming
I
year.
welcome.
Very interested with this. But obviously, you don't need a co-author because let me just do the stats on this. I mean, I knew you were going to be productive, but even I'm stunned. You produced 6 articles and book chapters in 2025. Look at me, I'm getting emotional. That's unbelievable, Damien. I'm so proud of you. So look at me, I'm getting a real mess. How did you generate that momentum and that productivity, brother?
I mean, it started in that 6 months after submission.
Yeah,
Because I had ideas that I knew I wanted to
really good.
push forward. I kind of focused in on three things. One was other skills I wanted to demonstrate so I could start thinking about grants. And so, particularly highlighting that I'm doing interviews and uh, semi-structured interviews with industry as an important skill that I have that I'm quite good at. And I also wanted to look around archival methods as well. So I spent some time in the Australian Screen Research Collection looking at the Green Guide letters, which I've got an ongoing project where I try and get there as often as I can to do another few copies of the Green Guide to review the letters and look at debates that were emerging. Um, but I also looked at collaborations. So I had my first publication was with another scholar, Whitney Monaghan. She had charted queer representation from the 1970s to 2000. And I had, as a
Wow.
fun project at the start of my thesis, found everything in various ways and watched everything and kind of created a spreadsheet of every queer character I could find. And so I asked Whitney in that lead up to my final year, would you like to work on this together to work out how we analyze it? And that's turned into a really productive, collaborative relationship. So two of those articles work with her. I led one, she led the other. And we have 5 or 6 planned for the future. Every time we're writing, we're like, oh, here's another idea. And then the third one was really the area that I want to work on is audience and understanding how we're conceptualizing and understanding audiences in different formats. I've been doing a lot of work around podcasting and how niche podcasts are assembling audiences, particularly independent podcasts. So these were the three things that I really wanted to demonstrate. So I've gotten 6 articles slash book chapters submitted in 2025. Two
Yeah,
got published that year, which was really
yeah,
good and kind
yeah,
of helped with the momentum.
yeah.
And I'm trying to continue that. So I'm using these three themes as things that I want to look at to help build towards my kind of growing pipeline of research with the view that, I'm in a full-time lectureship role for 3 years. I want to make the most of it, but I also have to, as part of that, be getting grants. So I need to be demonstrating that particular skill sets. I have to be demonstrating that I'm collaborating with people who I might apply for grants with so that there's a record of our working together and shows that we can be effective. And so I've kind of tried to be really strategic about the things that I focus on with that view of grant making. Grant applications are kind of the next big hurdle on my list. And so what do I need to do to be able to be ready and competitive in that space?
Look, I think that's amazing, and I've never heard of anybody doing it as overtly as that. Can I just repeat that back to you to make sure we're all clear? Because I think this will again change people's way of thinking about the present and the future. You knew you were going to have to demonstrate particular skills, skill development, and you had those skills, but perhaps you didn't have the evidential base to nail it down. And so, what you've done in your plan for this year is you've found strategies to develop these sort of nuggets of information, this evidential base to tap into to verify you've got this skill matrix. Is that actually the methodology?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And certainly I think, and maybe this comes from being in the industry, you
Yeah.
know, as you move up in the communicate professional communication industry, you have to kind of be proving you have the skill sets that you want to get, as you do in the academy. And so you're often identifying projects. You're like, oh, I'd love to be part of that project because I want to show that I've done this thing so that I can apply for a promotion. You know, there's going to be a role coming up in 6 months, and if I've done this, that's going to help me apply for that role. And if you have a good manager, which I've been really lucky, I've had great managers through my career, they identify where you want to go. They have that conversation and they start going, well, okay, you're going to work on this thing that's coming in the door so that you can kind of head in the direction you want to go. And that's kind of taught me, because academia is so, you're kind of on your own, or you're not on your own, but you're
You
on
are.
your own.
You are. You are.
And so there is an element of going, okay, I have to do this for myself now. Like I have to recognize what skills do I need to move in the direction I want to go, and then how do I show that I have those skills? Because it's no longer just, oh, I've been doing some work I'm going to submit next year with someone in surveying communities. So particularly that book author survey, because I feel like I need to have that skill set as well as part of what I'll be bringing to kind of a multimodal grant application.
Oh, this is phenomenal. And look, I always laugh. You saw me again smiling as you were speaking because there was always this notion that academics, we're not very entrepreneurial. We're not very entrepreneurial. Actually, every great academic I know has this entrepreneurial drive that works for a university, but has this propulsion to succeed that is highly entrepreneurial, which you've just demonstrated. And we need to go to the area that is so important but is so often invisible, which is, of course, teaching. And this is going to be a hard question, I'm sorry, and again, answer it in your level of comfort, mate, but could you tell us a little bit about the challenges of teaching professional communication PR in this year of all years?
Yeah, I mean, it's I love teaching. Like teaching was my pathway into a PhD. For context, due to my circumstances, didn't get to do the traditional uni thing. So I did an online undergrad degree while working full time. I did an online master's while working full time. And so my PhD was the first time I ever studied full time. And so I initially got into this kind of work because I thought, well, I want to give back. And so I started teaching as a sessional in an online university. And it was an incredible experience. I learned a lot and it made me want to do more so I could make more of a difference. And that was one of my motivations to doing the PhD, was to be able to contribute more to the academy. Um, and so I really love teaching it. I want it to be a part of my profession forever. And it can be invisible. And it's interesting that this year I taught a brand new subject called influencers in communication. And it's all about working with influencers across PR, advertising, and digital communication spaces, and this kind of growing and emerging field. But it's actually not that new. Like we have worked with
Yeah.
influencers forever. In the 19th century, they were royals. In the early 20th century, it was the golden age of Hollywood and celebrities as stars. Like
Betty
influencers have
Davis. How
yeah,
much stuff did Betty Davis flog? My goodness me. Mm-mm.
precisely. Like how many stars were telling you their favorite brand of cigarette? That was an influencer.
Joan Crawford and Pepsi.
Yes. Yes. So it's sort of talking about it in the sense that this isn't as new as we think it is, but the ways that it kind of operates are kind of evolving and changing. But then also kind of snapping back, like influencers are becoming more and more organized. There are agencies forming. So at one point, yeah, some ways it's become very independently managed, but also there are more professionalized versions of it emerging as well. And so teaching a brand new subject is a huge undertaking. And so there's lots of invisible work in the sense of not every idea worked. There had to be kind of adjustments made along the way. My assumptions about things students would know and things students don't know as someone who's new to the university weren't always right. And so there's a lot of kind of thinking on the fly. And that kind of work just gets absorbed into the ether. But it's also because it's your first year in a university, I feel like there's a lot more of that as you get your kind of understanding of the systems and of where this particular course fits in the degree. That means that next year it's going to be smoother. I've already worked out a whole bunch of changes I want to make, and it's going to be a smoother run. And so there is a lot of kind of invisible work in teaching. But I think I'm quite lucky. We have a really engaged cohort of students. They're really excited. RMIT is a very like industry aligned university. We have heaps of industry partnerships and we get to bring industry partners in to talk to students all the time. And so that also, I think, helps students feel really connected and engaged between and the relationship between uni and industry. And I think that has really helped kind of build an exciting relationship where students come in and they feel it's really relevant. And it is a challenge because I was a very I love studying for the sake of studying. Um, but I recognize that that is not necessarily why everyone goes to university. And so being in a university that has such a close tie to industry has been a really valuable and exciting part of this because I get to see students connect between the theory and the work and the assignments that we're doing and see that it actually relates to where they're going. And that connection, I think, gets them excited and makes us kind of feel confident in what we're doing.
Look, you've helped me a lot. This has been a very, very depressing year for those of us that do communication, media, and cultural studies. And you sort of think, is it all pointless? It's the end of the world. I go to the zombie apocalypse very quickly. I go from relatively normal to zombie apocalypse in about 3.5 seconds. And I've lived a lot of this year in the zombie apocalypse. But what you've suggested is with this great university, I have enormous respect for this university. And of course, it's located right in the middle of the city too, these fantastic buildings. So it's tremendous. I love it as a series of campuses, actually. But by doing this work properly, you are improving the profcom. And so you've
Mm.
got people with greater ethics and decency and awareness and literacies going into the profession. And that's got to be positive.
Yeah, yeah, and it's the big challenge we have at the moment is AI is being seen as a kind of panacea. And it's really interesting. We RMIT's PR degree, it's the first PR degree in Australia, turned 40 this year, and we had a big event. And one of our industry partners who we had speaking at the event talked about the importance of a really strong foundational skill set and being able to write, being able to recognize news value, reading the news, which is the big one we really have to push because the reality is you are not your own target market. Like you never get to work on promoting to yourself. So you have to understand how other people are consuming information. And so having that kind of reinforced by industry players is always really lovely. And the big thing they pointed out is like AI is probably going to form part of this industry, but what it can't do is replicate your expertise. You can read something and go, oh, okay, I see like what it's trying to do, but here's how I make it more original, more exciting, how it fits better for this particular pitch to this particular journalist. It, I think we treat this like an industry of formulas, like, oh, you just a media release always follows the same format. But like the most successful media release I ever sent and the most successful I've ever seen rarely follow a format. They're often very brief pitches that say, "Hey, I've got an idea. What do you think?" to start a conversation, more than these long form, inverted pyramid of news writing approaches, which are really important, and that's important for having the information available in the narrative you want it, but it doesn't always get the engagement you want. And seeing this kind of industry connection and their conversations about, well, AI can do some things, but actually there's a lot of things it can't do, and we need you to be able to do those things, helps us have those conversations with students and start that conversation about, well, let's think about how you can use it, how you can use it ethically, which is quite difficult because environmental impact, impact on in terms of slave labor or
Intellectual
exploited
theft.
workers. Yeah,
Intellectual theft. Yes, yes,
intellectual.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the finance bubble. We won't even go to the finance bubble. But again, what you've captured for us there is it's very important. I mean, what universities do is we teach rules, whether we
Mm,
call them genre rules or discursive rules, whatever. We teach the rules so that the rules can be broken with clarity and precision and reflection.
mm, exactly. That's exactly right. And you've got to play the
Mm.
game to change the game is the way I've always thought about it. And part of this is you want to change how this industry works, where you have to kind of get to a point in the industry where everyone accepts you understand how it works and you've got a good reason to change it. And I feel like that's the journey we want to take our students on because they're brilliant. Like I feel really lucky. Like they come out with ideas. I think I never would have thought of that.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
that kind of new blood, new excitement is kind of what we need.
Oh, I think it's tremendous. So we've handled research, we've handled the challenge post the thesis and the difficult liminal period and how you got through that. the first full-time job, and the challenges and the gifts of teaching, and the care through which student-centred learning and iterative curricular design can enable excellence. So that's been phenomenal. But we always talk about, the pillars of academic life. We've got research, we've got teaching, we've got university service, but we also have community service. And I've noted, and of course you've explained so beautifully to us, why that community outreach is so important to you. And you've served as the board member of the Melbourne Queer Film Festival. Now, again, I'm smiling deeply because queer film festivals are so important. There used to be a fantastic one in Perth at the Lumiere Cinema, those of you that remember the old Perth, and it lost its support, it lost its momentum, and that was a profound tragedy. And part of it, I think, was that it didn't have an effective board membership to enable, proper protocols and a forward-facing agenda. So you've decided to be a board member of a very important queer film festival. Why did you make that decision?
Yeah, it's sort of similar to the reason I started teaching was part of kind of giving back. I went to the MQFF when I
Yeah,
first moved to Melbourne. It was part of forming my community and getting an understanding of it. Um, Queer film festivals now more than ever, well, now as in the past, I should say, serve this really important role when we do see more content for queer stories being mainstreamed, but it doesn't represent the true variety, the true depth, the true kind of uh, potentiality of these stories. And so queer film festivals have formed their own cultural circuit and create a lot of value for these stories and create a format in which filmmakers, directors, writers, actors all get opportunities to kind of build their profile and build their opportunities in the industry. So I wanted to be part of that. I've always been quite involved in community organizations. Like, so when I first moved to Melbourne, I joined what is now called the Melbourne Pride Chorus, which was at the time the Melbourne Gay and Lesbian Chorus, obviously name updated to reflect evolving understandings. And, that organization did so much for me. I was part of the youth chorus and the main chorus. I built for the first time intergenerational queer friendships, and that was really important. That choir formed at the height of the HIV and AIDS epidemic, and it formed
yes,
around
did.
creating community and happiness and celebration in a really difficult time for our community. And
Yeah,
I got an education there because I didn't grow up in the queer community. The only exposure I ever had to my community was through television and the internet. I didn't understand the history that we had sort of grown up with beyond the fear that kind of was perpetuated. And so that was a really important part of me becoming who I am and
yeah,
forming my understanding and relationships with queer community. Uh, I at one point in that choir, I was the youth chorus leader, so I was on the committee, uh, and that was a
done.
really important skill building process in governance and event management, and kind of propelled my career in a particular direction. And then I also later, once I sort of started my career, joined at the time was called the Gay and Lesbian Organization for Business Enterprise, Globe, and I joined the committee of that and sort of contributed to, well, how do I exist in a professional environment? And they really helped me. I built some of the longest standing friendships I ever have. We formed an awards night, which is now called the Victorian Pride Awards. I ran it for 5 years with its founder, one of my colleagues who also now works at RMIT, did a PhD around the same time as me. And that
Amazing.
kind of community participation is
Yeah,
so important because you build skills. And I think people kind of underestimate, they sort of go, oh, you're volunteering on a committee or on a board, you're joining these organizations. You are building the most useful skills that you will take into your career. I always, like, students often ask, how do you get your start? Should I do volunteer work? And I'm always sort of saying, do purposeful volunteering. Like, what skill do you want to build, and where could you volunteer to build and demonstrate that skill? Like the Globes Awards night that I sort of ran the publicity and the judging and governance of for 5 years still appears in my key selection criteria of responses. It's this thing that I was part of building, that I kind of ran. I coordinated celebrity and high profile judges, so I know how to work with people who have difficult timelines and lots of competing priorities and bring them all together. And those skill sets have translated into the academy. I put on a conference last year, and part of the skills that I have is from all of the work I did in those volunteer roles.
Look, Damon, you're healing my heart a lot because, as we've talked about in other interfaces, I am a fag hag. I'm such a fag hag that I've written the article on the politics of fag haggery. I wish I was joking, and of course I'm 56, and so a generation on from you, and deeply involved in the gay community during the period that HIV/AIDS was proliferating through the culture, and a large chunk of my own PhD explored that through the Terence Higgins Trust and so forth. And people need to sort of remember, or our generation needs to share more what it felt like going to a club, Connections in Perth in my case, going to Connections once a week, and our friends stopped coming because they
Mm.
died. And what that does to a generation is stunning, I think. And you're healing that, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I think we underestimate the power of community, and
Yeah.
it's funny. I think community find like I grew up in a community. I grew up in the Catholic Church, and so I grew up in what was community. It's how my parents formed community and connection. My best friend who grew up across the road from me, who I am 6 months younger than, we're still best friends today. Like my parents are his godparents, and we have these very tight bonds. And that community piece, when you're queer, you often move. I was in the regional Victoria. You move away from home, finding that community really matters, and whatever form that takes. And I think we lost much of a
Yes.
generation.
Yes.
And so there are stories, there are experiences, there are people that we just don't get to know and don't get to learn from. And so it's really important that in whatever way we can, we continue building community, sharing stories, and
Yeah.
being together
Yeah.
so that we can build that.
Yeah. I mean, mate, if we're going to get out of the political mess we're in at the moment, it is going to be through community, and I thank you for that. Couple more questions, and then I'll let you get on with your life. And I'm sorry I've been so eager, but I think you're healing a lot of us from this very difficult year. So I thank you for that. And look, you have focused quite rightly, I think, on a lot of media outreach during this unbelievably busy year for yourself. The ABC, yes, and also the conversation. Why are those interfaces so important to you, mate?
Uh, Traditional media, so a lot of what I want to do, I want to connect it back to policy, and I want to connect it back to industry. And both of those uh, audiences, like then they are audiences, still engage traditional media. They still have media monitoring organizations sending them their mentions and the mentions of topics that they want to cover. And so to be on their radar, I knew that I had to be in the traditional media. But I also think about the role, particularly when I'm talking about queer representation on screen, that it plays in reaching audiences that may not agree with me. So going into those very mainstream locations and having a conversation about why it matters, it probably won't change their mind, but it ensures that they're hearing that it does matter to someone, and that there's research behind why it matters, why it's effective, why it's happening, why it's not as prolific as they think it is. Which I think is an important part of this, because people, I think, view more as too much or as over-representation. And so being able to sort of say, well, it isn't over-representation. We still haven't reached parity of what the assumed community population is an important part of this, just to have those conversations happening in those spaces. It also leads to opportunities. Like if you can get in the media, people contact you. Every time I've done a media interview, an academic who I would be really excited to meet will send me an email and go, "Oh, I love that interview." And I'm trying to do that now when I hear people and I go, "Oh, I really enjoyed that interview. I'm going to send you a comment and say, great job." Because it has led to not necessarily like collaboration, but just contact and networks and building, connections with people and having friendships and building community in the academy. And, I'm an outsider to the academy. I'm first in family PhD. I am not someone who grew up in these spaces. I grew up in regional Victoria in a tiny town. So building these connections is actually on me to kind of find ways to kind of build my profile and identify the people that I want to be connected to and to learn from and to work with.
And look, intellectual generosity is never wasted. I think we live in a time of people endlessly spruiking themselves. And it's like going back to our start of our conversation. If you spruik yourself without a sense of the audience, then it's completely pointless. But if you use the expertise, the literacy to build intellectual generosity, build a community, then the gifts that are returned to you are stunning. Which, of course, leads to my final question. We've got a lot of colleagues watching this who have done a PhD, are doing a PhD, are thinking about doing a PhD, and just can't see the ending, mate, just can't see it. What would you recommend to them at the end of this really tough year, looking to, let's hope, a better year? What would you recommend to build that momentum, to still be able to see that white light, that trajectory of success?
I thought about this a lot, and it's possibly a controversial answer. It comes from working in the communication industry. We have, or certainly places I've worked, have had a saying of 80% is good enough. And that's because 80% is how far you can get it before someone else needs to give you input. And in a big organization, that could be, oh, I've like developed this media release to this point. I actually need the subject matter expert to come and have a look at it and give me some, am I hitting the right points? Is there something missing? And then it has to go up through layers and layers of approval. The whole point is if you get it to 80% there, the other 20% comes from the consultation. And I like to think of feedback as consultation. And it's probably why I've kind of managed to get 6 articles/book chapters submitted is because I've gone, this is as far as I can get it. And I could obsess over this and try and make it perfect for the next 6 months. Or I could view peer review as consultation. It's someone coming in and telling me this is what you haven't thought about. And I probably wouldn't think of it unless they told me. And so I think that's the most valuable thing you can do is just go recognize when you've gotten it as far as you can on your own and that there is a role for consultation, whether that's supervisors, whether it's peer review, whether it's your, critical friends in your network. That consultation is actually part of the process, and viewing it as having to be perfect actually disadvantages you because then you're less open to what the consultation can bring. So, yeah.
You're fantastic. So done is better than perfect. Done is better than perfect. What does perfect even look like? And of course, as you've said, feedback is consultation. I'm going to put that on a t-shirt. I think that's my new thing for 2026. Look, Damien, I've taken so much of your time. I have loved this conversation. I mean, I love you as a human being. You know that. I respect you. I think you are a profoundly important intellectual force in this country and beyond. And you've healed me, and I'm sure you've healed others, to think we are going to make it as a species. And the next year, if we can build the links of community, if we can give without thinking we're going to get something back, if we can just reduce the transactional nature of community, we might actually survive. So, Damien, I thank you so much for being you. You are a
Well, thank
stellar
you.
human being.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you for everything. I think I've said many times, but you are the kind of shadow supervisor to so many people in many ways that help for me. Like I wouldn't have done a PhD if I hadn't watched your vlogs because you demystified the process and made it feel achievable. And so I thank you for everything you do.
Sweetness. Well, on behalf of Damien and I, we wish you love, light, and peace, and see you in the next year. You're wonderful. Good on you.